Balaam was a kind of priest, a kind of a magician, or a spiritual leader, all of them put together, and he was known to be able to curse peoples. And the king of Moab, Balak, was afraid of the Israelites who had come out of Egypt and gone through the desert for 40 years, and they were just entering the land of Canaan. And they destroyed two kingdoms of the Amorites who bordered on Moab, the kingdoms of Og and of Sihon. And he wanted to hire Balaam to come and curse the Israelites. And Balaam at first was reticent, didn't want to go. In the end he did come. And they came together, and Balak took him up to a high place where he could overlook the camp of the Israelites. And they built an altar, and on each altar they built three altars. All together they went up to three different places, and each place he built 7 altars, and on each altar he sacrificed a ram, like a sheep, a male sheep, and a bull. So 3 times 7, he sacrificed 21 animals, 21 sacrifices, and altogether 42 animals. And in each of these 3 occasions, he prophesied, and he prophesied about the Israelites, mainly in the end times, and he also prophesied them in the time of exile, about them in the time of exile, and after that, after they'd done this, and each time he had tried to curse the Israelites, but in the end, instead of curses, blessings came out. So Balak dismissed him and said he wouldn't pay him because he hadn't done what he'd been requested to do. So Balaam then prophesied concerning the Israelites in the end times. So altogether you have 4 occasions of prophecy, and that is what interests us at the present. So the first place they came to, Balak and Balaam together, they came to a place called the high places of Baal. Baal was a pagan god, the high places of Baal. And he spoke of the Israelites of a people who have not been cursed and who dwell alone, they live alone, and they will be immensely numerous, a great number of them. And this is a prophecy that Balaam said on this occasion. See Numbers 23 verse 7 onwards. He took up his oracle and said, Balak the king of Moab has brought me from Aram. Aram is in Syria, or northern Syria. That is where Balaam came from. From the mountains of the east, come curse Jacob for me and come denounce Israel. So he gives the 2 names of Jacob, of Israel, Jacob and Israel. Jacob is his first name. Jacob and Esau were twins, so Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were the forefathers of the Israelite nation. Jacob and Esau were the sons, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. And Jacob eventually received the firstborn rights. He was the one who would receive the promises. And Jacob was renamed Israel. And the Bible often uses the combination of Jacob and Israel in its prophecies, in its descriptions. And in some cases, Jacob represents the Jews, it's Judah. In other cases, Israel represents the 10 tribes. But this is not a ruling that applies in every case, and each case has to be looked for, has to be judged in its own individuality. At all events, Balaam said, how shall I curse whom God has not cursed? How shall I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. There are people dwelling alone. He says the Israelites will dwell alone, and not reckoning itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, or number 1/4 of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, let me end be like his. And Josephus 37 CE to 100 CE paraphrases blessing. It says, a multitude of your posterity, that is your offshoots, shall live as well in the islands as well as on the continent. And that's what we find, they live in the islands. And they're more in number than are the stars of heaven. And so we have the two sections of the Israelite nations. We have Judah and Israel. Today, about 50% of the Jewish people, that is of Judah, live in the land of Israel, and the rest are scattered. They have major centres elsewhere, especially in the USA, also in France and Britain and in other areas. And the 10 tribes are also in existence, and they are extremely numerous. They lost consciousness of their ancestry as they were supposed to, lost consciousness of their ancestral religion, but more or less they stayed together physically. Eventually they all migrated to the west, creating a peoples of Western Europe. From there many moved to North America, Australia, New Zealand and other areas. And the British on the whole were descendants of Joseph. The two sons of Joseph were Ephraim and Manasseh. We find Ephraim to be dominant in Britain and the British Isles, or people offshoots from the British Isles, and Manasseh more in America. And it was prophesied that the two tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, would play the major role in fulfilling the prophesied destiny of Israel. So it's worth a while concentrating upon them, especially since we are part of them, or live amongst them, or speak English like them. So this is much more convenient for us, and this is not for nothing. It is this way. It's worth noting, though, that the world population today is about 8,500 million people. 8,500 million people, the estimated population of the world today. The USA is the third largest nation after China and India. So China is the most populous nation. After China comes India. After India comes the USA. The USA is 331 million. And other Israelite nations combined give us 170 million. So altogether total is close to 500 million. We have 500 million people living in countries associated with Israel by us. That is not saying that all of them descend from Israelites, but a significant proportion of them do. A significant proportion, we can't give exact numbers, but a significant proportion, according to prophecy, are descend from Israelites. And they comprise 1/17 of the world population, approximately. That is 5.3%, of which the USA has the greatest part. The USA alone has 4.25%. So as we said, we don't say that everyone in those areas is descended from Israelites. It might be 80% or 90% or 50% or 40% or 30% or even less. But that is where the lost 10 tribes are, and historically wherever they are, they have been played a major role in giving rise to the nations they live amongst, and in determining its attitude, its natural attitude. And these nations, they only comprise less than 5% of the world's population, but they control about 60 to 70% of all the world's natural resources. So that is what was prophesied, is what they have. They're also the most powerful nations in the earth. And they are, and also in absolute terms, not only in relative terms. For instance, the USA spends as much on defence, or almost as much on defence, than the rest of the world put together. Not only is the USA the major country, the most powerful country in the world, not only is it the head of the list, but it's almost greater in the expenditure than the rest of the world altogether, put together. So that's worth noting. We also noted that the description said they would dwell alone, and nations in which descendants of the Israelites are predominant, all isolated from other nations, more or less. They're on the edge at the extremities of the earth. They're not on the whole. In areas where they're swallowed up by other peoples, on the whole. Also, especially the British and English-speaking peoples in the British Isles, they're isolated, relatively speaking. Canada and the USA are isolated. Australia and New Zealand are isolated. Culturally and politically, these nations are somewhat apart from other nations. And that was prophesied Israel will be separated from other nations. And Balaam says, from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him, though the people shall dwell alone, shall not be reckoned among the nations. This was from the very beginning. It was said of them. Virgil, a Roman writer in about 70 BCE to 70 to 19 BCE, he said about the British, the Britons, a race of men from all the world, disjoined, divided, distinct from other peoples. Shakespeare said, the world's volume of Britain seems to be as of it, but not in it. Napoleon said about Britain, the real enemy of them all, that is of himself and the continental nations, was that perfidious power which having nothing in common with the European nations but its situation. That is, the British have nothing in common with European nations, but only geographically they are associated with them. And also the British had a policy of keeping them to themselves, known as splendid isolation. It's a term used to describe the 19th century British diplomatic practice of avoiding permanent alliances. And the term was actually first used by a Canadian politician, George Elias Foster, and he advocated isolation from other nations. It was a predilection that they had. George, Foreign Minister Canning, 1827, had principles concerning it. And the principles were non-intervention, no European police system, every nation for itself, and God for us all. Balance of power, respect for facts, not for abstract theories. Respect for treaty rights, precaution in extending them. England, not Europe. Europe's domain extends to the shores of the Atlantic. England begins there, not to be involved with other countries. So that is a character trait that they have. Also, America has even more of this, even to a more extreme degree. And before the World War, they had a policy of non-intervention and of isolation. And now it's that they realised that the world was going crazy, and they had to intervene and they had to be involved. So they changed their attitude, but their initial preference was to be alone. So after that, after he went to the, after he had prophesied at the high places of Baal, he went to another place called the places of Zophim, the field of Zophim. Zophim in Hebrew can be understood to mean prophets or seers, people who see things, scouts even, to the top of Pisgah. Pisgah is the height. And he also gave prophecies there. He predicted the blessings are irreversible. This was part of the blessing to Abraham. By myself have I sworn, says the Lord, when he gave the blessings to Abraham. Abraham was blessed in two ways. Abraham was blessed in two ways. You see the blessing to Abraham, take the blessings of Abraham and put them together and compare them with each other. So the blessings to Abraham can be divided into two different sections. Wherever dwelling in the land is mentioned, it also mentions keeping the commandments. Elsewhere, becoming a great nation and helping other nations, it doesn't mention the commandments, it doesn't mention the land, because after the Acadah, after when Isaac was almost put to death by his father, Abraham had been commanded to do that and was stopped at the last minute. God said, by myself have I sworn that from henceforth for that portion of the blessings were irrevocable, unconditional, and had to somehow or another be fulfilled. Well, that's what the sources say. If you look at the blessings, that's what you see. So I was discussing this with actually a rabbi. I mentioned this point that we come up. Told him about the sources. So he says, what do you want to say? You want to say that they will be blessed, and no matter what they do, the blessing will come into effect. They won't get punished for their sins. So I quoted another source. Another source was from a midrash that said that when Jacob left the house of his father on his way to Aram, he came to the field, and then he fell asleep, and he had rocks. He used rocks for his head and around him, and he saw angels going up and down And according to the Midrash, angels represented the forces, the powers of the earth. And that one nation becomes powerful, goes up, and goes down, up and down, up and down. That was what and the angels represent the guardian angels of the country. So it's one explanation. So, and he had a voice saying him, this is a legend, go up on the ladder, go up on the stairs. And he was afraid. And because he didn't go up, therefore he lost his chance to be a ruler over all the earth. So they asked, so what was the intermediate understanding? How could he be a ruler over all the earth? Because of the way of people is that they sin. It's not perfect. People sin, or people, one generation keeps the commandments, another generation doesn't, or a person at one stage of his life is observant, another stage of his life isn't, and people lose out, and therefore they have to be punished. So the explanation was that they would be punished, but they wouldn't lose the rulership over the world. So if they sinned, then they would be punished by famine, or by some other way. They would receive the punishment, but together with receiving the punishment, the punishment would not include being defeated by other nations. So that is a point. So that is a point worth noting, that the possibility of that came into consideration. And the blessing of also these blessings in the field of Zophim. We find them Numbers 23:18, and he took up his oracle and said, rise up, Balak, and hear, listen to me, son of Zippor. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Yes, as he said, will he not do? Or has he spoken, will he not make it good? And behold, I received a command to bless, and he is blessed, and I cannot reverse it. He is blessed, and I cannot reverse it. He has not observed iniquity in Jacob, nor has he seen wickedness in Israel. The Lord is God, he is with him, and the shout of a king is among them. God brings him out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox, as it's translated. But actually a wild ox in Hebrew is raim, toyafet, raim. It says toyafet, that is the strength, translated as strength. But actually referring to the horn, the thing that lifts itself up, that is the root of the word, something that lifts itself up, the horn. And it says it in the plural, toyafet, but it's written as a singular, according to the letters, indicating that there's something there that may usually have had two horns, but in this case it's one horn. So this was an animal known as a raim. Possibly we would get our name ram from a horned male sheep. But a raim, in Assyrian known as rimu, it was a type of probably, as we understand, it was a type of auroch. An auroch is a wild ox, a wild bull, a wild cow, very large. Very large, about 2 or 3 times as large as our cows, as our bulls. Maybe 4 times as large. It existed until not long ago, up until the 1600s. You still had them in Europe, in Poland. 1600s, that's about 400 years ago, but it's not that long. And before then, much earlier than then, in biblical times, it also existed in the Middle East. And apparently there was a subspecies. It had 2 horns. But there is apparently a subspecies of this beast, in which the 2 horns occasionally came together and grew out as one horn. So there's where, and there's one of the sources for the idea of a unicorn being extremely strong and something that a beast that could not be tamed, as described in the book of Job, and having immense strength. And so, but there are also other animals similar, and in a similar way also gave forth here and there specimens with one horn, and that all that led to a concept of unicorn. So here, the Israelite in the place of exile is described as a lion and a unicorn. A lion and a unicorn, they are symbols of the Britain. A lion and a unicorn. Scotland actually has two unicorns on its national symbol. Britain, Great Britain has a lion and a unicorn because it uses a lion representing England and a unicorn representing Scotland. A lion and a unicorn, and they are the symbols and they are mentioned in this prophecy. There's no sorcery against Jacob, nor any divination against Israel. In the establishment of Jacob and of Israel, what God has done, look, a people rises like a lioness. Lioness is also a mistake. It should be like a Levi, a mature lion, a large lion, lifts itself up like a lion, Arya, a young lion, or a relative, actually an adult lion. He shall not lie down until it devours the prey and drinks the blood of the slain. So we have these blessings, and the principles are irreversible blessings. God is with him even though he may be sinning. God does not see it. He does not look at it. They'll have a king, they'll have monarchs, they'll have a monarchical type government, or presidential type government, which is also similar to a king. They'll have a unicorn and a lion, an old lion, a young lion, take a revengeance on their enemies.
Yeah, for you mentioned now the lion and the bull, Ephraim and Manasseh. Yeah, that's the first time I really take it to heart. Yeah.
And that's in the prophecy of Balaam. He mentions it.
Yes.
He mentions it, goes back and refers to it. It's very blatant there. It's very important portion of this blessing. Also, then the third place, that was the two places. The first place was the high places of Baal. The second place was the field of Zophim, or the prophets. And the third place was the Peor